Okay, hello everyone and welcome to episode 5 of Jigsaws with Jamie, or at least episode 5 part 1, as you've probably seen from the title. New location, new format for this puzzle. I've had to move into my kitchen because the table I've been using in the living room is just not going to be big enough. This is a 1,000-piece puzzle. Certainly wouldn't fit on the table, so we're going to need the space we have here. Although, as you've seen, it is part 1. I did make the decision that I am going to split up some of these videos. I think a 1,000-piece jigsaw solve is not something that you're going to necessarily want to watch all in one sitting. So what I've done is I've solved the puzzle a couple of days ago, and I've divided it up into 4 sections, roughly into equal quarters, so roughly about 250 pieces each. That's why we only have this single corner piece and not many edge pieces compared to the rather larger selection of central pieces. We are starting with the lower left corner today, and then in subsequent episodes we will solve the other corners before putting the whole thing together. This is Mike Jupp's I Love Great Britain puzzle, which I believe, well, let's get started. If you're joining in with a puzzle yourself, get yourself set up and join in, otherwise get yourself comfortable and enjoy the ride. I believe this puzzle was released in 2009, sorry. The main reason I believe that is when I opened the box, it was still sealed. It had a catalogue for buying more puzzles from 2009. So I'm assuming the puzzle came out in 2009. Before I get on to talking about other things, this week's charity recommendation, when we did the Egyptian puzzle, we obviously spoke about recommending the Egyptian food bank, and it only seems fair if we're talking about Britain in this puzzle, which we are clearly going to be doing, that we recommend the UK food bank. I wish I didn't have to, obviously, I wish I didn't have to recommend a food bank, but here we are. So the Trussell Trust is the recommended charity for this episode, and if you are in a position to sponsor them, the link is below, or to donate, the link is below. I'm sure they would greatly appreciate your support. So, on to the puzzle itself. I think, having done this before, what I'm probably going to do is talk about some of the features that come up in this puzzle as we go along. As you can probably see, or you might be able to just see in the background, there's quite a lot of characters that make appearances. Some very familiar faces, some faces that may not be quite as familiar to you all. So hopefully we can all learn a little bit as I solve this puzzle. I'm just working on the edge pieces, even though we don't have a complete edge. I still like to get the edge done. Around the edge it seems to be heraldic shields. I must admit I don't know a huge amount about heraldry, other than it exists. It was a kind of a medieval way of identifying yourself as a knight or the like, and has certainly kind of carried on into the modern era. You can get yourself, if you're a member of the gentry, the nobility, you can get yourself a shield, etc. I assume these shields around the edge have some significance to people. Yeah, I assume the specific logos mean something, but it's not an area of life I'm overly familiar with. Those pieces go there, certainly. It feels like we must be missing a piece in between. There is a possibility I've missed an edge piece while I was laying them out here. It's certainly feeling like that might be the case. We'll carry on, and if we still have a gap, we will fill that in later. So yeah, this puzzle, 1,000 pieces, doing it from scratch took me a couple of days. Well, I completed it over a couple of days. It didn't take me a couple of days to complete. It didn't feel like something that I could do in one sitting. I did make life harder for myself, I'm sure, because that's the piece I've been missing. I tried to do it in the living room where I've been solving my other puzzles, and couldn't lay all the pieces out, and so I was having to kind of search through pieces as I was solving it, which is not a practical way to do it, so that took longer than I expected. There we go, that's the edge, so fairly small area to be working with to start with, but obviously once we get the other pieces in, it will get much larger. I think the colours of the shields stand out quite a lot on the background, so I think I'll fill them in. If you can see, obviously the picture will be posted at the end, and it'll be on social media and the like, so you may well have seen the puzzle yourself, and you could probably see some of these shields, not so much on this corner, although I think this is for royal standards here, but certainly further around you've got kind of the St Andrew's flag, which is commonly associated with Scotland, on both sides, and in one corner we have what I believe is the royal standard. So let's if I put that the right way around. These, as you could probably hear, the shields are not the most interesting things to talk about, so I was hoping to get them done fairly quickly so that we can move on to talking about something a little bit more interesting. Not that these videos are meant to be specifically informative, of course. You're not here to learn, you're here to relax while I solve a puzzle and talk some twaddle. That's the idea. And I guess because there's so much going on in these puzzles, it's hard to focus on one particular thing. I did enjoy solving the puzzle when I did it the first time around. It was definitely very satisfying when I came to the end and got the last few pieces in, although I probably should have had a break, so I was starting to get a little bleary-eyed. It's getting quite late, but one of those things where you're almost there and you just feel like you want to finish. Well, that's the way I had got to. Excuse me, just wiping my nose quickly. That's kind of where I got to. I felt like I needed to finish, and it meant that I was a bit bleary-eyed, and probably slowed me down, ironically. If I'd have stopped, I might have got on things a bit quicker the next day. Rest is always a good idea if you're doing something that takes a lot of concentration. I don't think you can see my clock in the background. You might be able to hear it ticking, but it is quite late again today. My wife's feeling a bit better than she was in the last couple of videos, so she's not going to bed quite as early. So I'm staying up a little bit later. Partly, not that I kind of need her out of the house, but it's just easier for her to not have to tiptoe around while I'm filming these videos. Obviously any kind of little noise gets picked up. Like I said, I hope you can't hear the clock ticking too much. I can hear it, but I'm hoping it's not distracting. It might be relaxing for some people to just hear the time ticking. Okay, I think there are bits of shield left, but they're small pieces, and I'm struggling to see them. Sounds like we have some fireworks in the background. As we'll come on to talk about later on, because I know the characters on the board. It's coming up to the 5th of November, which for the UK and I believe a few Commonwealth countries as well, so Canada and the like. The 5th of November is not quite a holiday, but a special event, because that was when a attempt to blow up Parliament was foiled. But I'm not going to tell you anymore, because we will be talking about it, I'm sure, because Guy Fawkes makes an appearance. So I won't tell you anymore just now, for those of you who don't know about Bonfire Night. The person who is falling into place here is, I believe, Kelly Holmes, who was a long distance runner, Olympian, and I believe won a fair few medals in her time, and I think was made a dame. Again, those of you not in the UK, I'm sure you've heard of knights before. You have Sir Elton John. He's another character who will be making an appearance later. For example, you also the Sir is a male title. You have a female equivalent, which is a dame, and that's going to go in there, I believe. Yes, I believe Kelly Holmes was made a dame, so it should technically be Dame Kelly Holmes. Like I said, I'm not looking to talk about politics a lot. I guess knighthoods are not necessarily politics strictly. It's not. The whole system of kind of honours. It doesn't seem like the most the most efficient and the best way of running an honours system. Knighthoods and the like often find their way to people who may not necessarily be 100% deserving. I'm sure lots of people that won honours do, but there's certainly controversial names. And the honours themselves in the UK are quite oddly named, so a lot of them are still, so you may have heard of MBE, OBE. The E, or the BE, is the British Empire. So they are still orders on members of the British Empire, which I hope I'm not ruining the end of anyone's story, but the British Empire hasn't existed for quite a while. We still have territories, but I don't think anyone would even pretend to call it an empire. Now, I think this piece goes here. I'm trying to finish this ceiling. That bit goes there, and I think that's there, yes. So this looks like a thatched roof, I believe it's meant to be. Don't see huge numbers of thatched roofs where I live, my part of the UK. I should probably say, actually, for those of you not sure. So I live in Yorkshire, which is in the north of England. Gets complicated. I won't say extremely complicated. It gets complicated. The UK is the kind of nationally recognised country, which is the name on my passport. It's the name I write down when I arrive at another country's borders, etc. The UK is actually made up of constituent countries: 4: Scotland, Wales, Northern Ireland, and England. England's by far and away the largest of those 4, and I live in England. I live in part of England which is historically known as Yorkshire. Yorkshire doesn't really exist as a thing. It's not a kind of political entity, but it's certainly a historical entity. So if any of you has been struggling with my accent, I have a Yorkshire accent. I have a relatively strong Yorkshire accent, I'm aware. That was there, good. So I live in a city called Leeds. So just to make things even more complicated for everyone, there's not really just one Yorkshire accent. We're quite diverse when it comes to accents in the UK. And people that will live just a few miles away from me who will sound very different to how I sound. So it's a bit complicated. But yeah, so I live in Leeds. We've had a character put in, another character who's mostly completed, and there's a couple of bits still to finish of his. But I believe this guy is meant to be Richard III. So Shakespeare buffs will probably recognise the name, and history buffs will certainly know. So Richard III was a king of England, I think the last Plantagenet king. So involved in the Wars of the Roses, which was a civil war, effectively. Has a fancy title, but effectively it's a civil war. And he lost, kind of, without being too blunt about it, he lost. He was the last Plantagenet king and was killed at the Battle of Bosworth Field, which I believe is in Leicester. Well, I'm fairly certain it's near Leicester. And he lost to a man called Henry Tudor, who became Henry VII, who is the father of the probably more famous Henry VIII, a guy famous for having 6 wives and chopping 2 of their heads off. Not the most pleasant individuals, obviously. So Henry VII, the father of Henry VIII, he beat Richard at Bosworth Field, and Richard was killed. There's 2 buses on here, I'm just looking, there's 2 buses on here, which is confusing things, because they both look very similar, but there's one here and one here, although I think that's meant to be a tram. I'm going to just finish this one because it's distracting me when I'm trying to find pieces. That'll be over here somewhere. So yeah, Richard was killed, and I think the rumour or the story goes that he was towed around, or kind of tied to the back of a horse, and his body was dragged around the field and then dumped in an unmarked grave. So King of England, whose grave was unknown, which is unusual. There's most kings and queens certainly have, in the last 1,000 years or so, are buried in places where people kind of know roughly where they are, which crypt they're in or whatever. So to not have a grave is unusual for a king. He was, anyone who's read Shakespeare's play, Richard III, he's much maligned in it. He's seen as a bit of a conniving cheat. He is a hunchback. Technically, what we'd say, medically, he's got scoliosis. But just called a hunchback, and kind of a nasty character. Now we have to remember, William Shakespeare was writing for his primary audience that he was writing for was Elizabeth I, or certainly the approval of Elizabeth I was needed. Elizabeth I was the granddaughter of Henry VII, the guy that beat Richard III. So there's always going to be an element of, is this the kind of William Shakespeare saving his political bacon, saving his neck in possibly many cases. So there is a group, the Richard III Society, who were very keen to try and rehabilitate Richard III. Felt he'd been much maligned. He was a king. He just happened to lose. He lost the fight, and that's why he was kind of killed. But the way he's still a king. I suspect some of them probably considered the Henry VIII a usurper, but certainly, regardless, looking at making sure that Richard III was given due respect, or what they consider respect is people in favour of the monarchy. They had a suspicion that they knew where his body was, because there were reports written of where the body had been buried, but no one had ever found it. And when you plotted the reports on a modern map, it was under a car park, just a concrete patch of land that was being used as a car park, and everyone as you can imagine, ho, yes, of course, King of England is buried under a car park in Leicester, of course he is. So I guess when you make a claim like that, there's only one way to prove it. I assume crowdfunded. I don't know where the money came from. Maybe they raised it from interested backers, but they crowdfunded money to complete a archaeological survey. Everyone's expecting nothing, and you can probably guess from my tone that what they found actually was Richard III's body, which I don't think anyone apart from the members of the society actually expected. I think it was quite a shock to lots of people. So he was buried under the car park, as described by William Shakespeare. He had scoliosis, so he would have had a hunchback, as the term is there. And yeah, he was there. There's a particular woman whose name I'm not going to be able to remember. I've sort of been skirting around it. There's a particular woman who kind of led the society, and was certainly very kind of involved in organising the dig and everything. And she was clearly vindicated. So obviously they found this body. I think they did DNA testing on a known living relative, one of his siblings. I actually must have had descendants that they could track, and they DNA tested it, and there it was. And then I believe he's now buried in Leicester Cathedral. Certainly not a typical location for a royal burial. Anyone who's been watching the events around the Queen's death will know, not a typical place to bury a dead king. But there was debate about where to bury him. I think the Richard III Society would probably have preferred he went to London to be buried with the other kings and queens, but that didn't happen, and he's in Leicester Cathedral, and it's a bit of a tourist trap, I'm led to believe. It's quite a story. There was a TV show in the UK about it. It wasn't a surprise. When the TV show was on, it'd already been well publicised that this had happened, so it wasn't a shock to everyone. But certainly very interesting watching the process and things, and I'm sure there was a bit of dramatic licence included, but it certainly looked very exciting and very interesting. Why I tried to fit them in there, then obviously not going to be over because I have the lower piece there. This guy, that's where he fits. He fits there. So I think this is meant to be Lord Kitchener. We've got another character coming in. So I don't know much about Kitchener other than he's a soldier or a general. And I think it was his image that was used for recruitment posters during the First World War in the UK, and in this particular pose where he's pointing, and then the phrase "Your country needs you." So I think that's who this is meant to be. I assume he was a kind of high-up general at the time the war started. In fact, it's just coming to be, he could even have been the Minister of War or the Minister of Defence, or whichever minister it was, which would explain why he was involved in recruitment. Not sure if any of this is rubbish. I will pop a correction if I can below. If any of you are kind of aware of the reality of things, please pop it in the comments, let me know. Obviously, as always, be civil to each other. It's very hard in YouTube comments. So, what piece goes down there? So yeah, that's about all I know about Lord Kitchener. I must say, so I picked out the bag. When I split the puzzle up into four, I then put each of them in a bag, separate bags, so I wouldn't have to go through searching them for the pieces later. And unfortunately, I seem to have picked probably the least interesting corner to start with. I just picked the bag out at random. There are lots of interesting parts to this puzzle. A lot of characters in there, but this section has fewer parts. What we will do is make sure we're kind of discussing other things that pop up as well to keep this going. There's an advantage to having that sat there in front of me, is that I can obviously see the box and I am referring to it because it is a complicated piece, and obviously the picture helps compared to some of the puzzles we've done previously where the picture doesn't exist, or is just repeated patterns that kind of no help to you at all. In this case, the picture really does help. Except I found on this section here, so where it says "Love Great Britain," that doesn't actually appear on the puzzle. So annoyingly, there is part of the puzzle underneath that you can't see. So there's a couple of characters under there that you just can't see until you've solved the puzzle in real life. It's a little bit annoying because you're kind of thinking, what actually goes under here? I think it held me up a little bit for one of the pieces. So I think that would be kind of because the puzzle itself. Again, not about reviewing the channel, but the puzzle itself I think is actually quite nice. The pieces are quite chunky. They all slot together nicely. They're small, but kind of grab hold of them, and they're not flimsy. There's a couple of pieces that have broken, but by broken I mean it's slight tears. But you can certainly work with them. Okay, I feel like we are stalled a little bit. Carrying on along the bottom. So I guess as far as kind of the scenery goes in this puzzle, obviously it's not a real location, it's kind of an amalgamation of a variety of different places. But a lot of the scenery is London centric. A lot of the puzzle is quite London centric. For those those of you who've kind of never been to the UK, I'm about I think it's about 200 miles away from London. So not, it might even be a bit further than that actually, but certainly that's the kind of order of magnitude we're talking about. So I'm not terribly close. And certainly the UK is not on a scale of some countries out there. Anyone from the United States or Australia in particular always seems to be one that gets held up. This certainly is not a big country, but at the same time, London, the UK country as a whole is not London. There's much more to it than that. And I think sometimes, particularly kind of in international media, it can often be portrayed as London. There's a bit of a running gag where a news reporter or someone will just point to somewhere random and assume that it's London. It's another part of the UK. This piece here is really annoying me. So there's a part of a shield. Hold on a second. Sorry about that, everyone. My wife was just coming down to make a drink before she turned off the light. She's been reading. I'm just getting a drink. So as much as I'm sure you'd all love to see her, I don't think she really wanted to make an appearance in the video today. If you look on any of my social media, you'll probably have a good idea what she looks like anyway. So I think I was talking about London centrism before we finished, but I can't exactly remember, so I'll move on, shall we? So, I was saying this piece was annoying me, that's what I was saying, wasn't it? And it is annoying me still, even with my little interruption. I've not managed to. It's got part of a shield on, so it should stand out fairly easily. And then the rest of it is kind of window and roof. But it really is not obvious where it is. Okay, let's regroup. I should have regrouped while I had the pause, but I didn't. Let's regroup now. There's a part of what is supposed to be a representation of Nelson's column. So that is in London for any of you who've visited London. Column commemorating the victory of Nelson at the Battle of Trafalgar. Again, I won't talk too much more about that because Nelson himself makes an appearance later on. There's a version of it in this puzzle. I think I might try and solve a bit of it because it's a nice straight line. Straight lines do seem to stand out in puzzle pieces. I haven't said that I'm not making any progress in finding it, but they do usually stand out. Okay, I know who that is. That is Maggie Thatcher. I've seen a few more of her pieces. So, Maggie Thatcher, Margaret Thatcher, Prime Minister in the UK at the late 70s and during the 80s. Most of the 80s, I believe. That could have been all of the 80s, actually. Which probably doesn't need much of an introduction, and can't say I'm exactly a fan. So, the old adage of if you can't say anything nice, don't say anything at all. I won't say nothing, but I won't dwell on her too much. But anyway, she is here in the puzzle. As much as not a fan, she certainly fits the criteria of kind of a big part of Great Britain and its history. Probably should explain that I've been using the term the UK quite a lot. And again, if you're not from the UK, and even some people that are from the UK don't always get it. You might be wondering why I'm doing a puzzle called Great Britain, UK, what's this all about, what's the difference? Is there a difference? So there is. UK, as I said, is the kind of country, the kind of internationally recognised country. So on my passport it says I'm from the UK, and that's the kind of the internationally recognised country. And if you go to the United Nations, that's kind of what will be written on our bar in front of our desk and things. As I said, the UK is made up of 4 countries: England, Scotland, Wales, Northern Ireland, or constituent parts, whether they're countries or not. Again, it's messy, I'm not going to go into that kind of detail, but certainly 4 constituent parts. And again, we still haven't got about Great Britain. Where's that going? Well, if you look at the map of the UK and Ireland, the independent country that is Ireland, you'll see that they fall onto 2 main islands and then a series of smaller islands. We can ignore the smaller islands for today. They're not particularly interesting, certainly not part of this discussion. The larger 2 islands, the 2 largest islands you have are the island of Ireland, which is the 2nd largest. And I love saying that, the island of Ireland. That's the 2nd largest, and then the largest island is Great Britain, and that's the name of that larger island. And so the island of Ireland politically is made up of 2 countries, or 2 parts, which is the Republic of Ireland, independent nation, and then Northern Ireland, which is part of the UK. Great Britain, which is what we're talking about here, is made up of England, Scotland and Wales. And that is how they are divided up, and that has brushed over an awful lot of history, and it's an awful lot of very controversial history for lots of people, and I'm not going to delve into the details, because we could hear all year if we were to try and talk about how the United Kingdom ended up as it is. But anyway, as far as Great Britain goes, it's not a commonly used term. The only times really you hear Great Britain is when we are competing in things like the Olympics, which we compete as Great Britain. Anyway, I think that's probably enough geopolitics for today. It's not the most exciting topics, and be quite easy for me to say something that will upset people, because it has a lot of baggage, as I said. We have had two more characters making an appearance, which I should probably talk about. And I think this is supposed to be Morecambe and Wise. Much less controversial, not to do with politics. So let's talk about Morecambe and Wise. Both deceased now. They were light entertainers. They used to have a TV show called the Morecambe and Wise Show. Quite a bit before my time. They're kind of the original runs. I think in the 70s and 80s they were working. Tended to do a Christmas special, which I think is what I've seen most of. Kind of seen Christmas specials previously, and they do still have reruns of kind of Christmas specials, which are usually funny. They kind of would have sketches, special guests, jokes, song and dance routines, not uncommon, but usually very entertaining, and just kind of good old family fun. Nothing too serious. Piece goes in there. So yeah, that's Morecambe and Wise, the Morecambe and Wise show. There were a similar pair called the two Ronnies, Ronnie Barker and Ronnie Corbett. Very similar, kind of had similar setup. They did less on the musical side, if I remember. Again, much before my time, but watch the reruns. If you want to get an idea of what we're talking about comedy-wise, if you've never seen any of these, if you Google the two Ronnies, 4 candles sketch, 4 candles, I promise you it's hilarious, and it'll give you a very good idea of the kind of humour that we're dealing with. But yeah, Morecambe and Wise, a different pair, but very similar approach. Again, search for Morecambe and Wise on YouTube. I'm sure you'll find plenty of videos that you can watch. But we've had another character appear, and we're back to politics again, unfortunately. This appears to be Oliver Cromwell. So again, we're going to have to talk a little bit of history. So, and interesting, I'm listening to a podcast about this part of history at the moment, called Revolutions. If anyone's interested in the history of revolutions, I would highly recommend it. It's very interesting, very well put together. I think I've come to it quite late. It was kind of originally released. It's kind of still releasing episodes, but the episodes I'm listening to were originally released some years ago. But very good, and they're currently doing a series on the Civil War, which certainly covers Oliver Cromwell. So I mentioned the Wars of the Roses were effectively a civil war. We also had other wars before then, which you could certainly consider civil wars in England, but the only war that is called a civil war is the English Civil War. Most imagine there's a title there, and that took place in the 1640s. Now, it's called the English Civil War. I don't think it's the worst name in the world for it, but to pretend like it is that simple and straightforward would be lying. You really need to have a read of a good book about the war, or like I said, the podcast I've been listening to is excellent, so I would recommend that if you wanted to know more. It's extremely complicated, but the upshot of the English Civil War is that a parliamentarian called Oliver Cromwell came to prominence during the war, and at the end, when the war was over, the parliamentary forces had defeated the royalist forces under King Charles I. Obviously under King Charles III now, but King Charles I was captured, and eventually the decision was made to execute him. It's the only English king to be executed. The English kings have died. Clearly Richard III killed in battle, but kind of the only English king to be executed as far as I can recall. And for a period of a decade or so, the UK wasn't a K, as in it wasn't the United Kingdom. It was a republic, or a version of a republic now. It certainly wouldn't meet the standards of a republic in modern parlance, I don't think. It was technically called Commonwealth as well. Commonwealth and republic, I believe the etymology of the name of the word is very similar. So republic comes from res publique, Latin for of the people. Commonwealth, similarly, is of the people. So they're effectively the same thing. So yes, we were a commonwealth, officially kind of led by Parliament, but it didn't quite all work out that way. And Oliver Cromwell gathered more and more power, and essentially became a king in all but name. He was a kind of undisputed ruler, not without controversy as a figure. Certainly, yeah, I don't think it's any secret that I am a Republican, and small R Republican for those Americans watching, not big R. In that I'm not in favour of the monarchy, but I'm also I wouldn't say I was in favour of Oliver Cromwell either. I was a bit of a religious fanatic, and he certainly made some very, very dodgy decisions. If you go to somewhere like Ireland, he is reviled, and I think probably rightly so, given some of the things that went on in Ireland while he was there. Anyway, let's move on from Oliver Cromwell, because we've had a couple more characters appear. We've got a footballer here, 1966. Anyone who's interested in football will know that's the year that England won the World Cup, and English football fans, which I'm certainly not opposed to English football, but I'm not a huge football fan. But anyway, English football fans have not shut up about it ever since. That's the running joke. Anyway, so that's a footballer. And the other character who's made an appearance is one of the Beatles. I think that's John Lennon. I'm not a huge Beatles fan, so I might be getting that completely wrong. But actually, the cut-off of this puzzle runs right through the Beatles, and there's a lot more of them on the other side. So what I'm going to suggest is we talk about them when we do this corner of the puzzle. Now, I'm conscious we have been at this for quite some time, and I think we should be starting to wrap this up now. What I might try and do is put this pink tent together, because there's quite a few pieces of the pink tent. It stands out quite a bit. Yeah, that's good. Quite a few of these tents actually are quite useful, so it might be that we try and put these together as a way to speed things up. Because it feels like I can't see the timer when I'm sat doing these, so I have to guess. I've got the clock I can see in the kitchen, but with the interruptions and the like, I'm not entirely sure how long we've been at this. It'd be good to try and get this puzzle wrapped up. It's a fun puzzle, but we're going to have another couple of episodes of this. So I want to spend all of our time solving the first quarter. Right, this must fit here. There we go. That does fit there. This is why completing this corner is often quite useful. So corner, these tents, quite useful. They do stand out, like I said, and that's not going anywhere. I think that this is where it gets confusing. There are two green tents, just to make life a little bit more difficult. This one certainly comes here somewhere. And we'll guess that goes in there. Actually, I think that could be right. It is right. Good. This should go here. There we go. Making progress. The downside to completing these tents is there isn't much to say about them, because they are not anything genuinely kind of real. It's meant to be a market, I believe. Some kind of fair. It's not, and they're all labelled with certain things. We've got the agrarian reforms. What else do we have? We've got Great British Sport, the Wars of the Roses. They've come up already. What looks like the Industrial Revolution. Again, probably going to talk about the Industrial Revolution later on in this section, I suspect. You kind of see why when we get there, so I won't dwell on that. That goes in there. It's still holding out, isn't it? A lot of these bottom pieces are kind of a crowd. I'm trying to find parts of the crowd that go together is a challenge. We also do have what I think is part of a car. It's almost impossible to see with the board that far away from me. My eyesight is nowhere near good enough to try and actually read, kind of see the puzzle that close up. So I'll have to kind of focus on the big bits and hope that helps us kind of make everything fall into place. That's bike. Let's see, my eyesight's terrible. Wear glasses. Again, if you've seen my social media, you'll have noticed that. So I do wear glasses, but when I've got my glasses on, which I do now, my eyesight's fine. It's as good as it would be if I didn't need glasses. Could do with going, there's the piece that's been annoying me. It's there. I probably could do with going and getting having a review of my vision. A little while since I went. I used to go near my parents' house. Just never kind of found another optician, so still going there. But I've moved a little bit further away from them. So I suspect I might try a different optician and try and find someone a bit closer, just to save the travelling. Obviously, it's fine if you're just going for an appointment, but almost certainly I'll need new glasses. It seems to always be the case. Well, I could do with getting some new ones. These are getting quite old, and so you kind of you've got to go back for follow-up appointments and things. Pick up the glasses. It adds a lot of time. Obviously, I do go visit my parents, but tend to go after work when opticians are closed. So not useful to me. Right, I do feel like we're getting to the end of this puzzle now. That's going to go in there, isn't it? That's going to go there. That is correct. There's, like I said, not huge amounts. I think this is meant to be John Logie Baird, who's a Scottish inventor of the television, or kind of a version of the television. I'm assuming that's who that's meant to be. I've never actually, as far as I can recall, seen a picture of him. So it could be anyone. Could be anyone that we're looking at. I know I've just told you. But anyway, John Logie Baird definitely was involved in inventing the TV. So that's not wrong. It's just he might not have looked like this. Getting a bit bloody down in the corner here. There's a execution with people having their heads chopped off. Now, that's certainly happened. I don't think there's very few, if any, countries on the planet where people were not executed at some point in the past for crimes, and obviously still are in many parts of the world. However, the bit that is a little bit galling is decapitation was very much the reserve of the rich, well, the aristocracy, because it was quick and kind of, I think they assume relatively painless, because done and dusted, you don't know anything about it, providing they do it right the first time. And it was reserved for the rich. There is someone with a crown getting their head chopped off, which could be Charles I, like I said, the only king to have his head chopped off. But it sort of implies from the picture that actually there was quite a few people kind of decapitated, and just anyone and everyone. The poor, when they were executed, would be hanged. In the UK, if they were lucky, there were much more brutal punishments than that. But even hanging was a slow process, so it doesn't quite depict reality. But we're getting a bbit grim there. It's a bit inevitable really when we've got this puzzle. Finishing up at this section, but try to move on and talk about something a bit more cheerful. But actually we're probably about to finish anyway, so there's not much we need to talk about. We have 2 more pieces to go in. That goes there, and we are done. That's the first quarter of episode 5 completed. I hope you enjoyed that. Thank you for listening. Thank you for watching. Drop any comments you might have or questions below, and keep an eye out for part 2, where we'll hopefully have a section to stitch on. Unless I choose this section, obviously the upper right, in which case we won't quite be fitting just yet. But thank you for watching, and as usual, I'll show you the image of the first quarter at the end of the video. Until next time, see you later.